Good evening, everyone. Could I ask y'all to take your seats, please? Hi, everybody. I'm Janae Prince. I'm the Commissioner of City Planning, and I am super excited that you are here. Tonight is the grand finale for Plan A. I know. We have had so many of you come out and participate in this planning process, and it has been just wonderful. I'm really looking forward to getting this plan adopted, but tonight we have a special treat for you. We have a special conversation here with a whole lot of experts and leaders in their field. Now, they're going to introduce themselves, but I just want to say that this panel that we have on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the comprehensive development plan process, I'm telling you, I'm super excited, and you are really going to enjoy this program tonight. So with that, I'm just going to hand off to Candace Stansel, and she's going to make the magic happen.
I think we can put that one back. Yeah, totally. I'm hot. There we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Candace Stansel. I serve as your city's Chief Equity Officer. So glad to be with you all tonight and appreciate the applause on the conversation around equity, diversity, and inclusion. I'm going to invite our panelists to come on up, and we're going to get started. Pick your favorite seat. Your favorite seat. That was almost the same order we were sitting in, huh? And I'll just name, I've already gotten some questions from the audience, but I know I have two folks out in the space, Carolina in the back over here, Gabby on this side, who are taking questions throughout. They have index cards for you, so feel free while we're having this conversation to add to it. I'm going to let folks introduce themselves, so we'll get started with that. But I just want to name that we did post the definitions of equity, diversity, and inclusion in the back of the room because language is important. Equity is outcomes not being defined by your identities. Doesn't matter what zip code you're born in, doesn't matter who your parents are, doesn't matter what school is closest to you, they're all going to give you what you need. That's when equity's in play. Diversity, who's in the space? Are we here? Are we present? And then inclusion, are we creating a space that allows everyone to have a voice in this room, that everyone is equally able to participate, engage in the process, and be heard? And so I'm super excited to partner with the Office of City Planning for this work around Plan A. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to let folks do an intro, and what I'm going to ask you to share, introduce yourself, share your name, your pronouns, obviously your title, right? We love those kind of things. But I really want to hear quickly, how has EDI shown up in your personal life? And then what's one equity question you're wrestling in the work you're advancing? Chris, I think we're going to start with you.
Right. Hey, good evening. All right, you can hear me. Good evening, everyone. Glad you could make it out. Christopher Norman. So I'm the Executive Director of the Metro Atlanta Land Bank. And that is it's a quasi-governmental agency that kind of serves as a real estate company for the city and the county. That's one way I kind of describe it in a nutshell, and we do lots of things in that umbrella. It is just quickly, it is the fourth oldest land bank in the United States. There are over 350, so Atlanta kind of led the way 30 years ago in this area of land banking and adjunct real estate. So the city's been ahead of the curve for a while on lots of things. So that was one thing as well. I've served as the executive director for the last 14 years, and we've done a lot of transformation with that organization since the time. And in addition to that, I get pulled into other conversations, and so you may see from my bio, I was also chair of the board of the Atlanta Land Trust for 7 years, and was one of the founding board members. So I do have some, and helped to hire the current executive director there. So I have some familiarity with what they're up to and what they're all about. So I kind of hope that helps a little bit in terms of my day-to-day, what I'm involved in, I am a native of Atlanta, so grew up in Southwest Atlanta. So I've seen the city change and morph over the years. So that is something that I also have as a lived experience. So I'm involved in all sorts of things that really speak to opportunity and, more people at the table, I guess, through all walks of life. And that's also one thing that was with the Land Trust, is with the Land Bank, which we actually have incorporated equity as one of our 8 traits for the organization. We're actually publishing our new strategic plan. It will be hot off the press in the next month. And that's included as part of what we do. And so we grapple with the question of how do we deal with properties, particularly in areas that are the fact that they are in a distressed position or underinvested position or in a not optimally performing position, it's because of things that have happened historically throughout the city. And so we're trying to basically figure out how do we also get these properties as we bring them back to a productive use and to life, into citizens that can have that full financial benefit of these properties and also access to the amenities around them. So those are things we kind of struggle with and try to program around at the Land Bank. So I'm sure there are more questions, but I will leave it at that.
That's super helpful, though, right? Asking the question about how do we use where there is distressed property to benefit and enhance communities. Really appreciate that. We're going to go to Robin. Robin, tell us a little bit about yourself. Really name, pronouns, role, but also how does equity show up in your personal life, and what's an equity question you're working on?
Hello, everyone. It's good to be here and good to see all of you. Thanks for coming. My name is Robin Stacia. I'm the CEO and principal of Sage Consulting Network. And in a nutshell, I'm a governance and leadership consultant. But I'm also a practitioner. I'm a clinical psychologist. I worked for the Department of Veterans Affairs for 25 years in 3 different states, working with our veterans who are struggling with a variety of physical, mental, and emotional challenges. So that really laid the groundwork for the kind of what I think empathy it takes to do DEI work, is you have to care. And that's what I believe my purpose is with the work that I do. I work with board leaders and philanthropic leaders, some corporate foundations, where people really care about making a difference in the lives of those in their communities. And so the intersection of that to what equity, how equity shows up in my life, is that from being a young child, I grew up in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I remember my father often saying when he watched the news, if there was a persistent issue that was on the news, he would say they'll fix that when that happens to white people. And I never quite understood what he meant as a child until I got older and I began to see the trends of what really is happening in our communities. And I began following a psychologist. His name is David Williams. He's a race and equity researcher out of Harvard. And he coined this term called the empathy gap, which means that until we really care about each other's lives, circumstances, conditions, challenges, inequities, we will not solve these issues because you can't legislate it, you have to care about it. And that was really what my father was saying, is they don't care about us. And until they, meaning institutions, systems, people, mindsets, neighbors, police, all of the theys care about everyone, we're gonna have this empathy gap. And so I see that each and every day, wherever I go, I see the empathy gap. So in my personal life, I'm waiting for us to solve this gap, which means I'm waiting for us to really care enough to make a difference. And so that goes to the next question, is what am I struggling with in work? It's with my clients who put diversity, equity, inclusion first, but now we're in a space where we have executive orders that forbid many people to do the things they maybe care about. And so how do we continue to do this work in a climate where there's There's dissemination of orders, there's fear, there are challenges. People are running away from the work, people are abandoning the work, people are abandoning communities. And so how do we still move forward and get this work done in a way that shows that we do really care about it? So that's what I'm struggling with each day.
Thank you so much, Robin. Tiffany, I'm going to come to you. I want you to talk about your work and how this shows up in your world and your work.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I'm honored to be here with you this evening. My name is Tiffany Roberts. I'm the Public Policy Director at the Southern Center for Human Rights. We are a nonprofit law firm, and our mission is to decriminalize race and poverty in America's Deep South. So we could say that equity is at the core of the formation of Southern Center. Next year, we'll be 50 years old, so we've been doing this work for nearly a half a century. We have an impact litigation unit which sues for constitutional violations. We have a capital litigation unit because we were founded during a time that defense attorneys could call their clients the N-word in open court and still have their bar licenses. And we have a public policy unit. That's what I direct. We do local, hyperlocal, statewide, federal, and international human rights work. My orientation to equity really begins with my mother. She is a social worker, an organizer, and her master's thesis at Howard was Urban Renewal and the Right to Return. And when we think about equity, I don't think that my mother would have thought that 40 years later, when I was in law school, I would be writing around about gentrification, the right to return, right? The impact of major events and development on marginalized people. I think she probably would have imagined that when she finally had a family, her children wouldn't be struggling with the same issues. I don't think that when she was in graduate school, she would have imagined that she would move to Atlanta and 20 years after that be fighting to save a homeless shelter that was being raised for the 1996 Olympic Games. And, you know, equity to me means that everyone has the same right both to enjoy society, but also to contribute to society with their relative starting points being considered. And what we struggle with at Southern Center is how criminal legal systems in particular are the net that catch people when we actually don't want to see them contribute, when we don't want to see them benefit. It is unfortunate, and it is something that happens in this country that doesn't happen at the same rate in other developed nations. I think that when we talk about city planning and development, we can't forget the people that we're afraid of. We can't forget the people at whom we are angry. And we have to consider how they, when restored, can contribute and benefit from the society that we all hope to enjoy. So I'm hoping that 40 years from now, my daughter isn't struggling with the same questions that I'm struggling with.
Thank you. Joel, I'm coming to you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Joel Alvarado, I proudly serve as the Vice President for Strategy and Engagement and Partnership for Southern Equity. We are about probably a 16-year-old organization that was established by a native Atlantan, Nathaniel Smith, when he realized the conversation in the South, and in particular Atlanta, has to move beyond equality into equity, where equality will allow us to all be in the same room, but equity ensures we all benefit from being in that room. So I come here with that spirit in mind, seeking fair and just inclusion for all residents in the city. And the work we do is multifold, intersectional. I represent a division called Portfolios, where we have 4 issue areas and 2 community engagement verticals. The issue areas that are probably, well, all our work is intersectional, so all issue areas. We deal with health equity, we deal with climate equity and the democratization of energy, we deal with the democratization of development and equitable land use policy. We deal with the democratization of capital, entrepreneurship, economic inclusion, and so on and so forth. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge one of my esteemed directors, Suzanne Burns, who's here, who's director of our Just Growth portfolio. Hey, Suzanne, how you doing? I put you on the spot. But I'm privileged to work with phenomenal human beings and thought leaders in this space who was nothing more wants to advance racial equity in the American South and ensure shared prosperity for all, and on top of that, ensure the freedom and liberation of black people. And that doesn't mean that others do not enjoy freedom and liberation as well, but unfortunately, our history, which is going through a erasure at this moment, is continually shows instances where policies, practices, and beliefs have undermined the full-throated investment of African Americans into this American experience. And so, for me, equity is real, and what I want to do is show. And I appreciate the question, Kenneth, because a lot of times we always talk about what equity is not, right? And we always put a deficit lens on it, and I appreciate you doing the opposite. So an example for us where equity was real was the Biden's executive order for the Justice 40 executive order that he issued, where 40% of funding would go to climate justice work in communities that have historically not received those dollars. We and two other national organizations established an accelerator that had 4 cohorts that led to 151 Black and Indigenous organizations being able to get technical training, investments, and other supports, which led to over $150 million in federal and state federal and state funding going to these organizations that they may not have received if not for the realization that equity did not exist, and that there was a history of systemic racism within the federal procurement process, and the willingness of a leader to do something about that through an executive order, which led to monies going into areas that historically had not gone to. So that's when equity is real. And the issue we need to, and I'll just say this, is that I don't want to see executive orders to lead to equity. I want equity to be a way, not a what. I want equity to be normalized and fully integrated into every aspect of our decision making and what we do, we live. Because then that's when it becomes real. It just becomes something that we do, is something who we are.
Thank you, Joel, so much. Really appreciate that. I'm going to turn to our commissioner, who's been thinking about this work for a long time. And Commissioner, share a little bit about yourself, your pronouns, and then how does this work show up for you as you wrestle equity as Commissioner of City Planning?
Hi, everyone. I am originally from Detroit, but I have lived in Atlanta for 30 years. And I've always been interested in all of the neighborhoods that I wasn't familiar with, that I didn't normally go to. So think about that. As a city planner, I think a lot about how we can include everyone in the planning process and how we get what we want in our plans. But every neighborhood's needs are different. Now, as a city planner, I look at everything through the lens of the built environment. And different neighborhoods need different things. When we as city planners go out into our neighborhoods to do our work, we know city planning, but nobody knows their neighborhood better than the people who live there. They know what the neighborhood needs. They know so much better than we do. That's why when we go out and into every neighborhood, we do this very same exercise. And I keep saying every time I speak at one of these meetings, tell us what you want, we'll write you a plan to get it. We've made a really concerted effort to appear in every single NPU in the city and to go out into every neighborhood, every school, every church, every homeowners association who invited us. And I kind of lied a little bit. This isn't really our very last meeting. It was supposed to be. But I think we're going to have 4 or 5 more because we received some invitations to do this. And we're happy to do it because we want everyone to be included. Now, I think that everyone wants to live in a safe, beautiful, economically vibrant place. But different neighborhoods need different things to get there. And that's why we go out and that's why we ask the important questions. and why we come back to the office and say, how are we going to get that neighborhood where they want to be? After this planning effort, we're going to be doing a series of small area plans. The comprehensive development plan is a citywide plan, and it's kind of at 30,000 feet. We're going to take a deep dive into a whole bunch of different neighborhoods until we keep doing that until we have to update the CDP again. So we'll be out there. You'll see us again. This work will continue.
Thank you so much. And I think this is actually a great transition because my team who's in the room, thank you to the Mayor's Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion team, will tell you that one of my favorite words is operationalize. Everybody's always talking about dreaming, imagining, love all that too, but operationalizing equity is what uniquely government can do, right? We are here to implement things that work. And so we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that organizations like City of Atlanta and our partners can do to ensure an equitable development experience, right? As we start to implement this plan and think about what's left in terms of the design. And so, Chris, I'm going to come to you first, actually, because you're thinking about the foundation, the land. Talk a little bit about what the model between the Atlanta Land Bank and the Atlanta Land Trust are teaching us about kind of what that entity and structure can look like, why that's helpful, and how that's being replicated across the country by others, and why that matters.
Okay, thanks for the question. So if we go back in our Wayback Machine to when people were thinking about the Beltline, and there was a sense in the community that this might be a very successful thing. And having studied cities across the country, they figured, well, you have successful things, people like to be close to them, they like to be close to the new thing. And so the whole notion started to percolate amongst a group of about 40 leaders in the city by saying, maybe we need to start a land trust here. So coincidentally, the land trust movement was started a little south of Atlanta in Albany. And the cousin of Martin Luther King was involved in that, in the creation of the first land trust. And that came out of a racial incident when farmers were kicked off of their land, which they did not own, and therefore just really impaired their ability to make a livelihood and all that. And so it came up with something called a community land trust. How do you hold land forever at the community level? So in spite of what happens around you, you can participate in it and not have it happen to you, but be with it. And so the idea was to create a land trust here in Atlanta, and it's evolved to now this current name, the Atlanta Land Trust, but that was around the original goal was to operate in the proximity of the entirety of the Beltline, all 22.5 miles. And so this is a new nonprofit that was launched. It was not a revenue generating entity. It was a thing to basically say, okay, we have this goal of getting land to this entity and we want to turn it into housing. You want to have people in there buying or renting and all that. And so it kind of moved along, we repositioned it. And so when we started repositioning it, because before it was the Atlanta CLT Collaborative, before it became the Atlanta Land Trust, there were supposed to be many land trusts throughout the city, but that was not financially feasible. So we collapsed it into one. Now, part of my background, I was a banker before I did this work. So for 17 years, I did finance and all of that. And so I have an MBA, and I said, well, this is a business case. So let's reposition this thing, and that is the land trust. But the land bank was charged with being a permanent member of the land trust. So we have a permanent seat on the board. And why do we do that? Because we understood the intersection of land and the land trust. If the land is coming to the land bank as a government, can they basically parlay that into opportunity for the land trust? And so we have a permanent board seat. I became the chair of the board for 7 years there. And one thing that evolved out of that was we entered into a formal memorandum of understanding with the Atlanta Land Trust and the Metro Atlanta Land Bank, whereby they get preference of property that's located close to the Beltline. So anything that comes through us, they get first look, is that something they can use for their programming? And also, they can buy at a discount. So we also have the state, when it created the land trust, the land banks in the state of Georgia, they have the unique ability to set the price of the land that they sell. Now, we have a policy for that, but we can set it from zero to market. And so that's a powerful tool for the 30 land banks in the state of Georgia to basically meet the needs of the community. And so basically they can buy property discounted from the land bank, goes into the land trust to be created. And that was one of the first formal connective points of a land bank and a land trust in the United States. Remember, I said there are 300 plus land banks. There are also over 300 land trusts. And so the Federal Reserve did an analysis of that. We've had some people come and look at our documents, and we've shared it with all of that. So we have this deal. So we've transferred about 15 properties over to them. They develop into houses, into quads and other things that people are living in today. And so that's one way we try to leverage the position of the land bank. Because the land bank, just understand, when we intersect with property, it's probably going to be at its cheapest price in its existence before it becomes something. Because you know that first step out, if you pay $1 million for a piece of property, well, guess what you have to build? You have to build something to get that money back. So if we're dealing with property that's in a very distressed, very early level, we're able to position it before it is wildly appreciated. And we knew that was going to happen because of the Beltline. And so that was the goal, was to try to basically have this entity that can bring property into the land trust to create these projects that are close to this beautiful new amenity that has all sorts of beautiful things around it. It's been a great project, but this is something we work on. So that is how this works. And one of the things land banks have realized is that you hear the stories of redlining and things of that nature. The neighborhoods we're going back into kind of have the double, well, it's not only the double challenge, but it's a double slap of your neighborhoods were underinvested and you weren't allowed to grow your equity. And then the properties are cannibalized and then taken away from you, and then they're turned into property that makes even more money. And you've not had the opportunity generationally to benefit from either step. So the former red line neighborhoods are becoming very prosperous neighborhoods. And so we're trying to say, well, how do we have some equity for people to stay in the neighborhoods that are close to these places and to basically benefit from this new wave of equity, and I'm talking financial equity now, that is going to be created. So that's what we say. So I would leave it at that.
No, that's super helpful, Chris. And I think a couple of things out of that. One, and I'm coming to you, Joel, I know you want to respond. You had to have the vision, right? You had to see further than what was just in front of you. You had to believe that those neighborhoods can be more than what we often have named them or called them to be. And I think that is what equity requires us to envision more for ourselves and our world and our city and our neighborhood, which is part of this development process. Joel, you want to jump in?
I just want to say real quick, I think I look at the Land Bank Authority as a representation of equity as well, because it's giving, because of the price points it can offer land, especially to nonprofit developers, it allows for innovation to occur. It allows for new ways to think about ownership. And that is part of the equitable thrust that we should be looking for, right? How do we ensure that more people can move away from renting to owning? And so I just wanted to double down on what was said, and also really implore people to think innovatively and to ensure that all people can benefit what's being offered here in this plan, not just as recipients as renters, but as owners, both of businesses and of housing.
Appreciate that. I want to talk about what it means to ensure people are in the process. So Tiffany, I'm going to come to you. As we're thinking about this plan and really defining what Atlanta looks like at the 30,000-foot view, I really want you to talk about how we ensure, folks are at the table. So how should we be thinking about supporting and assisting those who are unhoused or system impacted when we're thinking about opportunities like land, designing spaces, et cetera?
Sure. As I was walking in here today, what immediately came to mind for me is this reminds me of the process we used to build PAD, the Policing Alternatives and Diversion Initiative. That was, PAD was the brainchild of community organizers and impacted community members. It was a small community organization called Blocks, came to City Hall because there was an ordinance to criminalize people who engage in sex work and banishing them from the city, right? And so we came to City Hall to do a work session about that, and then we learned about all of these programs that were happening all over the country to intervene and redirect. And we decided, let's have a program that looks nothing like the rest of the country. Let's build the best program. And so it went from meetings in living rooms and rooms in City Hall to bringing dozens and dozens of stakeholders into the room to use sticky notes, right? But what we had to think about, and I was just one of many people, what we had to think about was what factors not only drive engagement, what factors deter engagement? And not only engagement being the question, how do you build spaces where people feel safe? People have to know if they come into a building, they're not going to be profiled. No one's going to look at them and say, well, I can tell you don't have a place to live, so therefore your input isn't wanted. You're not going to be followed. So that may mean you can't have all of your meetings in government buildings. It may mean that you are not using technology in all of your processes. Hyperlocal has been very important, not just for the development of PAD, but all of the processes that Southern Center erects to make sure that our clients, who are the people who much of society would really discard, whose input isn't valued, aren't valued because maybe they're not tax-paying citizens. Maybe their input isn't valued because they have criminal histories. Those are the people that we fight for. So we are accustomed to not only them being ignored, but us also being ignored. An example that I brought up when we were preparing for this is we have a process now for people to chime in on how Fulton County and Atlanta should move forward as it pertains to the DOJ consent decree for the Fulton County Jail. So we have this really fancy interactive presentation, and we're collecting data from folks, and they can click around, and we leave each meeting with priorities from the communities that we've visited. Well, when we went to Atlanta Union Mission and we were getting people to come and participate, and folks come over to the church to have a meeting, there are no devices, right? People may not even process the survey in the way that we're giving it. And so we had to think about interacting with pen and paper, people being able to go into breakout rooms and have one-on-one conversations when they're not comfortable sharing maybe a very traumatic story. The thing that I think is the most difficult is folks don't want to have conversations that make them uncomfortable when that discomfort is based on their own mistakes, right? So like we as social engineers, or civic engineers, or we make mistakes, and we make mistakes that actually harm people. People know when you're coming into their communities and you want to hear from them with the caveat that you don't want to hear anything that you should have done differently, right? So for Southern Center, for example, we have sued and won 4 lawsuits against Fulton County for its jail. We have to admit that litigation is not an effective tactic alone if we're talking about human rights abuses. So we can't go into communities and say, here we are the saviors, and we're going to save you by having another class action lawsuit against the jail, right? We have to say we've tried that, and while that is a tactic, that is not the answer. And I think similarly, any of us who do work that is intended to benefit marginalized communities, criminalized communities, there is a certain level of ownership that we have to have with these processes. We have to be willing to be indicted with the work that we are doing or by the work that we are doing. And when you do that, you can either rebuild trust or build new relationships of trust so that people can at least know that if you are in conversation, one, it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue. But secondly, they can expect the same level of dignity coming to them that they are extending to you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I really appreciate that. And I think, yeah, go, please. We appreciate the applause, absolutely. And I really hold, as a person who has been in this seat for a little less than 2 years, I had not worked in government before, right? And so coming into a space where I'm acknowledging where the city has been complicit in things that we've created that haven't worked, and how do we do that differently is such a huge piece of holding. There have been many administrations, there have been many folks in different seats, and we're just trying to get it right this next time so that communities really can say we trust and believe that you're in it with us. So I really can appreciate that. Robin, we're talking about communities being engaged. We've been doing a ton of engagement. Janae just said there's going to be more meetings, which we love. talk about why it's important to hear from community when we're designing spaces and how that leads to more equitable opportunities for folks.
Yeah, I think I am. So, one of the things, first of all, I am really impressed with what has already occurred, with the multitude of conversations you all have had and the places where you've been. One of the things that I have found to be really significant when working with communities, for communities, is ensuring, that we have this saying, it's called ensure all voices are heard. Well, that's really very generic. You could have a room full of 100 people at each of your meetings and all voices were not heard. So what I have found, particularly in small towns in the South where I've had the opportunity to do some of this work, is you really have to specifically search for the voices that you want in the room. You have to make sure, and I think Tiffany said this as well, that we're hearing from people from all identities, from all walks of life, particularly those who are invisible, who feel silent, who feel silenced, who feel objectified, who feel marginalized, and who have been objectified and marginalized in ways that prevent them from being able to honestly speak their truth because they don't feel comfortable speaking their truth. So when we've done this work, we've gone to libraries in the communities where people live, but that particular meeting maybe was for single moms only. We've gone to churches, and maybe that particular meeting was for people who identified as LGBTQ+, or people who were seniors, or people who identified as Black or a person of color, or someone who English is their second language, so that we ensure that in at least some small spaces, in addition to the large everyone come all spaces, we really are hearing from everyone. So we are really following that credo, all voices are heard, and we're making sure that there are spaces where those voices can be represented, people can show up, they feel comfortable and they feel empowered and they feel safe, sharing their lived experiences and what would make their lives whole. And then the other thing that we found that's important in these gatherings is that you have some way of interpreting what they're saying, because a space is really a composite of all the things we want to do in our lives. And if that space doesn't contain those things that make life meaningful, it's not valuable to the individual. And so one of the things that I've used, and I brought my note because I want to make sure I said it correctly, is we use this National Equity Atlas, which looks at trending comments that individuals say to give relevance to how important it is. So, for example, economic vitality. A space has to offer what does the community offer its citizens so that they feel economically vital? The other aspect is readiness and well-being. What do community members experience in terms of skills and resources to thrive? So what are they saying that aligns with how this space is going to help me with my well-being and with my ability to thrive? And the third one is connectedness. And that's how are communities connected to economic opportunities, to wellness, to mental health, to vitality, and to all of the things that individuals want in their communities. And so when we're in these small and large spaces, we really are asking and searching for those very specific and targeted answers that lead to enriching spaces with all types of opportunities, businesses, live environments, walking spaces, whatever you want to call it, that really creates what individuals feel they need. So for me, it's a combination of all voices heard in a targeted way, having a model that you use and with how you listen so that you're capturing information that you can then translate into real outcomes, into really experiences that communities and their citizens really want and need.
Really appreciate that. Yeah, please. I'm going to go to Joel in just a second after I talk to the commissioner in a moment, but I think one of the things that Robin worked on that I thought was so interesting when we were having this conversation, I'm from a super tiny town in the South Mississippi Delta. It's like 8, maybe 12 stoplights now. We got a Walmart, so, we're coming up. But it is the place where the highest number of lynchings happened in this country. And it's also the place where the phrase Black Power was first used by Stokely Carmichael. My grandmother was aligned with Fannie Lou Hamer and the work of registering people to vote. So I come from a place that has a lot of history, right? And Robin did some work in the South looking at spaces that were built at times where everyone wasn't welcome and how we redesign those spaces to make sure that folks feel seen, right? Imagine walking into your favorite space, whatever that may be, your church, your synagogue, someplace that feels like home. What does it look like? What do you see? What do you feel? Who's there? And when we do that well, it actually creates a different experience in our communities. And I think evaluating buildings and spaces for how they make you feel. Do you feel seen when you walk in the door? Folks, in this building, we're sitting on the first floor, but right above us is the Hall of Mayors. It's every picture of every mayor. It's really powerful to walk through there and see how this city has developed and progressed around the image of what a mayor means, right? And so those are things I encourage folks to think about as we start to implement this plan, right? As we design spaces around where we're going, what does that look like? What does it feel like? And how do folks see themselves in those spaces? And so, Janae, I'm going to come to you because we're talking about the plan in a lot of different ways. What are some of the questions you've had to wrestle during this process related to equity? And as we think about moving from the 30,000-foot view, what are some of the things you'd want the community to be thinking about?
I really liked what you said about spaces that make you feel comfortable. My undergraduate degree is in sociology, and I focused on urban sociology and the way that the built environment makes people feel and what environments people feel most comfortable in. So I'm always thinking about those things and what might come out of this planning effort. We're already doing some things that are really helping along that safe, beautiful, economically vibrant vision that, we all have, that we all want. It might look a little bit different from one neighborhood to the next, and it might take different tasks to get each neighborhood where they want to be. But there are some things that we are already doing that I think are helping things along. The center of each neighborhood is someplace you want to go. Everybody wants, well, almost everybody. Some people don't want walkable neighborhoods, but most in Atlanta do. But even those that don't want to be walkable still want a central gathering place. They want to have close to them a store, a restaurant, the library, what have you, something that you can walk to, places where people gather in the community. And a lot of our neighborhoods don't have that. We are working with an organization called Livable Cities through the Breaking Barriers to Business program to do just that, to help small business owners in Black and brown communities develop those businesses, create those businesses, help those businesses thrive at the center of the neighborhood. A lot of our neighborhoods are food deserts. And you really do need to be able to go to the store and buy a head of lettuce and some tomatoes and you can make that salad. We don't have that. We don't have a lot of fresh food access everywhere in the city. So we have a goal right now to have fresh food access within a half mile of everybody in the city. And we're at about 67% right now, and we're working on it. To that end, you probably wouldn't think of this as a city planning thing, but we do food systems planning in our department. And we work with small growers through the Aglanta program and the Grows a Lot program to get the fresh food where it needs to be. It's probably not what you were thinking about, right? But we do these things, and we're coming at this from a lot of different angles. and every neighborhood needs something different. So we try to bring to each neighborhood what they need and fill in the gaps where they're needed. This doesn't even address our affordable housing efforts, which, everybody has heard about. But we're doing our best to create those safe, beautiful, economically vibrant spaces for everyone.
No, so appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner Janae. I think one of my favorite grocery programs, to your point, locating one in a rec center. I was like, where are we going? We went to open this grocery store. We're in a recreation center. It's amazing. And, kids are running around and we're cutting a ribbon on a grocery store. And so even the innovation around thinking about what does it mean to create a space, yes, I love I won't say certain brands, but I love my favorite whatever grocery store. But I also love my neighborhood market a ton. I live near Pittsburgh Yards. Carver Market's my little neighborhood market. I love that place. Every time I go in, I feel seen and heard and supported. And so I think those are the things we're trying to create. And as we create the plan, the conversation Joel and I were having as we were prepping for this is there's a lot of factors that impact how this plan comes together. A lot of folks are interested. A lot of partners want to help. But Joel, how do we need to be thinking about the other pieces of the work outside of the plan that really enhance what's possible when we think about equitable development for the city of Atlanta?
Absolutely. I knew I was going to get set up. So that's what friendship does for you, right? First of all, allow me to say, let me thank the city of Atlanta for not shying away from equity. And we're seeing so many people just turning their backs where 2 or 3 years ago they were fully invested in equity. And then all of a sudden you're seeing people just shy away because of the climate we're in. I appreciate the city of Atlanta standing tall and recognizing that they will not abandon the pursuit of equity in what they are trying to accomplish. I think that needed to be said. So I wanted to make sure you heard that. Also, I appreciate all of you coming here this evening for this conversation. You knew this was going to be a conversation about equity. You decided to come. You showed a commitment and an appreciation for it. So I want to thank you all for doing that as well, because anything we're going to accomplish, we have to accomplish as a collective. Us 5, us 6 up here alone are not going to be able to accomplish what we want for the city. It requires all of us, and your willingness to be here and be a part of the conversation, hopefully be part of the solution, should be commended as well. So I want to thank you all too. Nobody's going to clap for yourselves? Clap for yourselves. So I think yesterday, right? Yeah. Yeah, time is very fluid these days for me. Yesterday, we were having a conversation, and I talked about the need to look at this work with regards to an ecosystem, and the need to think about this as either a planning or infrastructure ecosystem, equity ecosystem, because this plan that you have here doesn't exist in a vacuum. The success or failure of this plan isn't solely predicated on this plan. There are other factors, external and internal, that play a role in regards to this plan. And so the first and foremost, what the commissioner alluded to it, and I think in our conversation yesterday, you used to talk more about it, about how do we invest the time in order to educate all Atlantans about what planning and development is like. Like for us as an organization, we have something called Development Watch, which is play off of Neighborhood Watch, where we instead of watching neighbors, we want to watch developers. So we take communities and we help them understand the language, the thinking of development, and be able to have meaningful, substantive conversation with developers and planners about what development is, and more importantly, what do they want? And more importantly than that, how do they get it done, right? And so if we really want to ensure that everybody is heard in this, let's make sure that everybody has the language to be heard. So that's one, right? I just wanted to lift that up. Then within the ecosystem that I was alluding to, we have to understand who are all the different actors that play a role in the success or failure of this plan, right? And when I was talking yesterday, I mentioned some examples, or some concerns I had that we had to consider. For instance, there's inequity in regards to insurance in low wealth black neighborhoods as opposed to other neighborhoods. So how do we intend on realizing the implementation of some of these aspects of these plans in certain communities if the insurance industry is unwilling to be supportive of that? How are we intend on doing that if the financial sector is unwilling to support that? How are we willing to deal with that if if those who oversee transit, are they going to ensure that they're going to ensure that people are going to get from point A to point B? How are we going to ensure that, another issue too is that, you know what, when you turn over 50, you forget everything so fast. It'll come to me, it'll come to me. Anyway, the point is that I wanted to really emphasize the fact that we need to know the array of actors that play a role in the success or failure of this plan. Because if this plan doesn't live up to expectation, everybody's going to blame the plan, and I think that's patently unfair. We have to acknowledge that there are other forces at play that we all need to be aware of that play a significant role in the success or failure of this plan. Most importantly is us, because one other thing that I lifted up, and I don't know if we'll have a chance to explore later, is accountability, right? Because the plan itself doesn't mean anything if there's not accountability to ensure that it is implemented in a way where it's with fidelity, and it's implemented in a way where equity is centered, right? So that's important. And that's why I look to back and making sure that people fully understand what development and planning means. So that way they can be part of the accountability apparatus, right? I know I'm holding like this. Can you still hear me? Okay, because I talk with my hands, you know. I don't know if it's because I'm Latin or because I'm left-handed, but I talk with my hands a lot. So I apologize for that. But nonetheless, what I want to make sure moving forward, I live in Atlanta. I've been in Atlanta for over 30 years. I'm originally from Brooklyn, New York. And so whatever happens, it's going to impact me one way or another. And so I have a vested interest in this city. My son has a vested interest in this city. And your children and your family has a vested. So I'm willing to do my part. I'm willing, as an Atlantan and in the work I do. And so in the end, I hope that all of us are willing to do so as well, because we are all part of this ecosystem that I'm referencing. We all play a role in success or failure of this. We all should be holding the city to account. We should all be ensuring that equity is in the forefront of it. We should all be ensuring that when any person in Atlanta walks out of their home, that they turn left, right, straight ahead, that they are living in a community that they envision for themselves and their families. If we don't aspire for that level, for everyone, then we're not thinking high enough, we're not thinking grand enough. Because if we really love the city like we say we do, we should ensure that everybody, when they walk outside of their home, gets to live in the Atlanta that they see for themselves and they see for their community. It has to be green, it has to be clean, it has to be developed, it has to be safe, and it has to be something that they could be proud of, something that they're willing to shout to the top of their lungs about, and saying, I'm so glad I live in the city because the city believes in me, and the city was willing to invest in me so I can live the life that I want to live, and my family can live the life they want to live. That should be the standard we set. And I believe that's the standard we want to set, but they're not going to achieve it if we all don't play a role in making sure they achieve it. So that's what I'm here today. Ecosystem.
Thank you, Joel. Thank you so much. Yes, please. This is why I get to moderate these panels, because I get to be with all these brilliant folks. I'm going to turn to y'all's questions, because there were questions that came from the audience, and some of these are directed at certain folks, but I'll invite other panelists. If you have a particular reaction, feel free to jump in. I'm always reminded of the quote that said, the city of Atlanta is the city too busy to hate, and that transition that came later more than I love, which is the city that's never too busy to love. And so I think one of the things, Joel, that you mentioned yesterday that we were touching on is housing and the ability to be housed in the city if you desire to live here is a critical piece. We've had some actors engaging in purchasing homes that have made it harder, right? That have made it harder. And so one of the big questions Atlanta's wrestling is, how do we think about affordable housing, right? How do we manage that in a way that supports lots of folks? And Chris, this first question is coming to you, which is one, and I think you can speak to what parts of this feel right, but the question was, how do people looking for affordable housing find those resources? But more importantly, the question is, how can affordable housing be more transparent? How can people understand how to engage in that process? And then I think also Commissioner Prince will probably have some thoughts on that as well, and I'll talk about the Housing Help Center.
That's just a simple little question,
I know,
right?
I know.
So that's a multi-layered question. You know, the origin story of the land bank was all about revitalization. So if you go back to pre-Olympics, this is when the land bank was started. It was started in 1991, became operational in 1994. And the neighborhoods when it was operating basically were in need of revitalization. So if you think about the city core, those were the neighborhoods. Grant Park, you know, I'm from Atlanta. Grant Park wasn't Grant Park. Piedmont Park wasn't Piedmont Park. You know, all these neighborhoods are beautiful, and everybody lives there now. But in a city of 1 million people or so, now we're in a metropolitan area of 6 million people. You know, this place has changed a lot. And so what that has happened is that the conversation has shifted from revitalization to affordability, because we have basically, primed the engine. People are coming here and they're staying here. When they do that, they need places to stay. And so there's been an evolution of this. I'm part of the strike force with the mayors, has assembled a team. We all know he refers to this as the group project, and it truly is. And so it really takes partnership of a lot of different players to make this happen. So no one agency, and I hope people walk away with that, no one agency or one entity can do it by themselves, and they don't have all the answers. So we have all these brilliant minds here, we have these folks, but everybody has to work in concert, for one. So when you start thinking about why are we in this place, that's because the complexion of the city has changed in terms of just how people live. Atlanta, it also at one point, 85% of the people lived in single-family houses. Okay, so now people are moving from this whole way of living in houses to multifamilies, to high-rises. We didn't have all this stuff. So all this has really changed to the point I think we're in the top 5 in the United States in terms of high-rise apartments built in Midtown. So you look at our skyline now versus 10 years ago, it's dramatically different. So what is happening is people are interested in living in the city. Affordable housing is, it's a difficult proposition because you have the land basis. We live in a capitalistic society, so anybody can sell their land for whatever they want to sell it for. And so you have these drivers. Remember the comment I made about what's the baseline transaction that starts this domino effect of that. And so as people acquire property, they have to get a return on investment, and that drives the types of things. And so you have to think of rational economic decisions people are making. So developers make rational decisions to maximize their return, which means I'm going to build the most expensive thing I can on this piece of property. And so therefore, how do we collectively work together to ensure some affordability is put into that same dynamic, right? And so that's part of the things we try to do. So we're trying to position property to get into these affordable housing situations with nonprofit developers, with folks that are marrying subsidy in, that are marrying grant opportunities, they're marrying bond issues from Invest Atlanta, all these types of things to basically create this affordability. And also, my other hat before, I was a banker, I raised capital for companies and all this kind of stuff. Understand really, when we had the big crash in 2010, there was no such class of single-family houses in portfolios for private equity firms. Okay, so that didn't exist. So all this is really this is new. And so we're grappling with the thought of people owning 100,000 houses. Nobody thought about that. And so now we see that now. But they're not the sole driver of this. It's also because people are coming into the city. And because we've just heard, people want to live in walkable or close to, the commissioner said, you want to be close to your restaurant, you want to be close to this. And therefore, that the way people used to live is shifting. And we just have to kind of recognize that and figure out how do we leverage every single tool we have to do this, and also have the right players at the table too. Because you have to have a mindset to do affordable housing, okay? Because remember, the default was build everything for most expensive you could be, right? But we have to have the right pool of people trained to do it, equipped to do it, capitalized to do it also. Because the developers have to make a living and live too, right? So it's also nonprofits have to have a income stream to pay themselves. So you have to think about this entire ecosystem of how do we get to the end game. So anyway, so that's part of it.
Yes.
It's a very complex, layered thing, but that's just a start.
Yeah, and I want to name, Chris rattled off a bunch of different resources really quickly, right? Bonds, et cetera. What I would say is if folks have more specific questions, happy to connect and talk about what the city is uniquely doing, introduce you to our team who drives our housing work. Just as our core piece of it, there are many people thinking about affordable housing in lots of unique ways. I'm going to go a little rapid fire because I think I'm down to probably Gabby, 5 minutes. And so I want to do this really rapid fire. Commissioner, this one comes to you. What is the timeline for the plan? Does it go back to NPUs for a vote, or how do you expect it to reach City Hall? Just a little bit about that process.
Yes, it does go to the NPUs because we've worked together with the NPUs to get everybody out to the meetings, and we need to make sure that we captured everything that we were supposed to. So they're going to be a little bit of our quality check a little bit, make sure we got it right. And this will come back to the city council in early summer, and hopefully we'll get a vote then.
Awesome. Thank you so much, early summer. Chris, this one is last question, and then we will close. One, can you talk about just very quickly, is it typical for the city to partner with developers with the expectation of a rate of return? How does that process look? And I know that's a big question, but quickly.
Yes, I think every project is looked for the developer to have some return on their investment or equity. Nobody wants somebody to work for free. The return hurdles may be a little different. But yeah, everybody's expected to have a developer fees and return on investment. Yes.
Does the city need a return?
Does the city need a return? Well, the city has an opportunity to have be a cost center and to absorb that, and that would be their subsidy. Yeah, so that would be my.
I have a follow-up question for Chris. Yeah, so one of the conversations that people are often saying about the large amount of apartment, as you said, multiple dwellings that Atlanta now has is, of course, it's a lot, feels very overwhelming, but also they're very expensive. And so does the city negotiate affordable housing within these? So can you talk about that? Because that's what we hear, or people hear, but folks don't know how to access that, or really what does that look like? So can you provide some insight and transparency, both you, maybe the commissioner, whomever, about how the city engages affordable housing within a market development?
Yeah, so we have a couple of entities that think about this really quickly. So Atlanta Housing is our quasi-government partner. They're on the cabinet. We meet with Terry often to think about that. Yep, I'll come to Joel. So there's some really structured processes for that. We also have the Housing Help Center, which is at 2 Peachtree, that you can walk into and say, here's what I'm looking for, here's what I need, how can I find resources and support? So and I would just say the Housing Help Center is new because there was not always a streamlined one-stop shop. And it's not perfect by any stretch, it's new, but it is how we think about putting all the resources in one place for information. Joel, go ahead. You need to use your mic.
I was going to say that I'm a commissioner on the Atlanta Housing Authority, and all I would say is that when we have our board meetings and our committee meetings, what we don't have is input from people, and if we want people to know about the work we're doing, those properties that will offer affordable housing. I hope that people will go onto the website, be very transparent, and come to the meetings, hear about what we're doing, hear about where these new developments are occurring, and see what the process is in order to apply for the housing.
All right.
Also,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, sure, Commissioner.
There are
This
places
is your world.
in the city where the city has made major public investment, for example, the Beltline, where we have an inclusionary zoning ordinance, and a certain percentage of units have to be affordable not in perpetuity, but for a long, long time. I signed all those land use restriction agreements, so I ought to know, I want to say 20 years. The other thing that is happening inside these walls is right up there on the 3rd floor in the Office of Buildings, affordable housing applications have their own work stream. So they move through very quickly. We also have Affordable Housing Week twice a year, where we work with our affordable housing developers to help them with technical problems, financial issues, figuring it all out.
I want to thank each of you for your insights. I'm sure folks will hang out for just a second if there are any last questions, but I just want to appreciate everyone in this audience for your willingness to engage in this process, your willingness to center equity in how you live in this city. Equity is how we actually make choices, how we move in the world. It's not some ethereal concept. It is literally the decisions you make every single day. And so I would ask that you think about how you can contribute to the city we so deeply love that gives so much to us. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night.